stuff and so
Mhm.
much grief work, so much grief work. And it might start out with, well, I lost a loved one. And then it becomes this larger and larger and larger and larger well of grief that people feel compelled to explore. And then we come together and find not only the grief and allow that grief, but we also invariably experience the joy that is
Mhm.
on the other side of it.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I have great joy in the work that I'm doing right now, as do clients who are doing it.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm
It's
sure you experience that as well.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. In my own practice, and then
Mhm.
with the folks who stay with us in the community of practice is what we call our more in-depth practice group. Yeah.
And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very mad world. Mad world.
All right. Welcome to another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. I am your ever-present host, Dean Walker, in this tiny little outpost in the interwebs called Living Resilience and the Poetry of Predicament podcast, which is also a YouTube channel. And I am thrilled to welcome our guest today in the Poetry of Predicament. He's a very dear friend of mine from years and years now. And we were just reconnecting after it's been quite a while. And Carolyn, I don't know how to introduce you without getting a little bit hyperbolic because we were just talking about the number of books that you've written is extraordinary. And it was already a pretty decent list when we first met. And you have just gone on, some with your writing buddy, Andrew Harvey, with
Mhm.
whom you dance so beautifully. And some of them have obviously been your own on your own as well.
Right.
And yeah, again, it's just very difficult. I'm just feeling into what I'm saying, and it's very moving for you to be here, for me to retouch into how much you have presenced into this global conversation, into the tiny population but growing population of people who give a shit, or one way or another, they're in contact with what's going on, and it's something bigger than any of us,
Yeah.
bigger than all of us. And you have been writing into that space, like with some of the most important topics that I can imagine. There, you happen to have written a number of your books right on track with what so matters most to me. This idea that there would be an extraordinary kind of intimacy or relatedness that we could dig into ourselves and into our relationships and cultivate in these times rather than to be at the effect of these times and be in less and less relationship, more and more polarized, and all the other aspects that have been growing and growing and corroding our culture over
Mhm.
these years. You've been prescient, you've been a wise and clear guide for us. It's been extraordinary to just watch you keep bringing forth these elements. There's a consistency and an integrity to what you brought. And so it means a lot that you're here today. I want to speak a little bit, feather in a little bit about what the program here in Living Resilience and Poetry or Predicament and so on. But really, what I'm interested in is if you would share, because I consider you an exemplar, a model of what's possible to keep stepping into the unknown, but keep having that sense of integrity that you keeping your center, the center with you can hold indeed, where the center on this planet and with the vast majority of human beings, there is no center. So welcome here. And really what I would love to do is that there's a kind of a mental health, relational health, spiritual health theme in this programming that I'm doing and Living Resilience and all that. And that's one of the themes also in this Poetry or Predicament series over this year. And I literally don't know anybody I would rather have here setting the tone along those threads for this time. So welcome. It's great to see you. Great to have you here. And I've said a lot. I would like it, if there's anything I've left out of my very brief introduction of you, if there's anything you would like to include and like to be known that I had left out, please do that. And then I just can't wait to hear what you're up to. Where are you headed now? What's alive for you now? And what, if you wouldn't mind also, I would be thrilled if you would give us a sense of what you're seeing now, given you've had this extraordinary view, clear seeing for years that you've articulated into your books. What are you seeing now? And then what are you leaning into now? So, hi, welcome.
Hi. Those are a lot of questions, and you'll have to remind me as we progress what you want to know. Thank you, first of all. Thank you so much for inviting me. It is always a joy and a privilege and a pleasure to just be with you and hang out and talk about what we see and what we're doing.
Yeah.
You know, I think one of the things you talked about, a mental health component or theme. I think one of the things that is really prevalent for me right now is that in all these years that we've been talking about collapse awareness and collapse acceptance, the theme has been, certainly in the beginning of that movement, the theme has been, well, how am I going to save myself and the people I love? And it became about save me, save others. What do we have to do to prepare? And, and how are we going to maybe even turn this around? And now what we're really beginning to see, and with kudos to people like Thomas Hubble and Gabor Mate and many others, we're beginning to see that this is much more than about save me. It's about I have to do this work that involves my own trauma, that involves my own wounding, in order to meet this crisis in any meaningful way, with 2 feet to stand on, or I'm going to be crushed and pulverized.
Right.
I have to have these tools, and I only get these tools from doing the inner work.
Yeah. If I could just pause you for a second,
Sure.
you're reminding me of how I articulate this territory you're laying out for us. I just call it the inner work of collapse.
Yeah,
Like if I love that you just said, if you're not doing this scale of work, if you're not this tall, you don't want to be riding this ride because it's
right,
going to be painful,
right, right.
unduly painful. And not that there won't be pain across the board, I guess. There's no way to know who's got the winning strategy or
Sure,
track,
sure.
but it seems extremely likely, or
Mhm.
actually just I think you're right on
And
that.
what do I mean by doing this work? And what do you mean? Well, you have laid out beautifully in your work and your website, and now this more recent program, what the work is. And I have certainly laid it out in my books over the years. And there are so many people who, in one way or other, have laid it out. We do not lack the skills to
Right.
do this work. We don't lack direction. It's all there. It's work to be done, and it's very clear what the pathway is. But are we willing?
Yeah, exactly.
Are we willing?
Really great question. And if I may, it seems like there are two dimensions. I'm sure there are more, but there are two dimensions that come to mind as you're again laying out this track. One is that individual ownership of my experience and my direction and my path in this world. And so, what is my inner work
Mhm.
to do? What is my shadow to explore and integrate,
Right.
and on and on? There's also the cultural at whatever
Yes.
collaborative or
Yeah.
larger scale level. And what comes to mind is the unmetabolized, massive traumas and massive discordant elements that we have just overridden for generations.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
don't know if we're ever going to really touch into them before this thing self-terminates. I have no idea. I think it's a roll of the dice for people wiser than me to figure out. But it does seem uh, equally important to just acknowledge the presence of that residue, that toxic residue of
Mhm.
generation upon generation
Yes.
of
Yes.
slavery and genocide
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
grief beyond the imagining. So, so we got a personal version track you can speak about. You got a larger scale track you can speak about. Keep us going. Where do you want
Well,
to go?
I certainly think that we must be engaged with what's happening in the culture and our own little wherever we feel called to help heal the culture. But
Mm,
we got to know what's going on. And it drives me crazy when I hear people say, well, we shouldn't, mix politics with this, or politics and spirituality. We should keep them safe.
mhm.
And it's like, really? Uh, it's like, what planet are you living on? Because you're not really here. So we have to, my friend Andrew Harvey, that I've written 4 books with, his whole life work is sacred activism,
Mhm.
the marriage of spirituality and activism. And for that, you have to be informed about what's going on in your culture. You may
Yes.
not want to look at it, but you need to look at it in order to heal yourself and the community around you.
Yeah. I'm really glad you're saying that. And I know that you and Andrew both have been fierce, literally fierce about that truth of the moment, that we don't get to be warriors, truly leaning into whatever's we're present to, unless we're willing to tell the truth about it, really be vividly aware of what is actually going on.
Right.
There's one little sliver of again, this work that I think is in parallel. There's a gorgeous article from a couple of months back by a social scientist named Julia Steinberger. And the article is called What We're Up Against. And she just lays out this vivid step-by-step expose of her exploration, her investigative journalism, and others about these core issues at global level.
Mhm.
And I just so got it about her commitment and the quality of her reportage that I named this segment of every month. There will be a small segment in the monthly coursework called What We're Up Against.
Ah, mhm.
So to highlight
Yes,
just not
great.
doom scrolling to make us gag, but actually just one sliver each month that
Mhm.
is an order of magnitude more essential to know about
Yeah,
than anything that's else is playing out.
absolutely.
So
Good.
thank you. Vivid,
Yeah,
important
yeah.
point. Thank you.
Another way of saying that is, there are folks who have been studying collapse for a long time, and they will say to you, well, this stuff that we're going through right now, particularly in the United States and around the world, this trend for anti-democracy, that's all part of collapse. And that's inevitable. That's going to happen with collapse. So we don't have to look at that real hard. We just know it's going to happen. Well, I like to think of when I'm up at 35,000 feet and I look down, I see the world in a certain way.
Mhm.
When I'm down on the ground, I see the world in a very different way.
Yeah.
So at 35,000 feet, it's okay to say, well, it's collapse. It's all going to come with collapse. It's just, it comes with the package. But when you're on the ground, that's a different story. I don't see it that way. And we do need to be very aware and and responsive to what's going on the
Mm,
ground.
mm. You know, it's interesting the way you're describing that brings me into my body just in hearing you say that, coming from that 30,000 foot example down to here and now.
Right.
And it is in my body and it is in relationship.
Yeah.
And so it seems like without going into anywhere near the depth or breadth that uh, Ian McGilchrist goes into, uh, thank God, because I'll
Yeah,
never be
really.
able to read his book.
Yeah.
But what's been missing and what is missing in the what's running our culture in a self-terminating fashion is something without context, something without relationship,
Mhm.
something without a way of feeling connected with
Right.
life itself, with other people, even
Yep.
with my deeper self.
Yes.
So that would be his right
Mhm.
hemisphere, left hemisphere duality.
Right.
And what I'm hearing you point at is bringing ourselves back into that right hemisphere where the context lives and it can
Yes.
infuse into, and it can actually be a part of our muse is the context of our relatedness. Hmm.
Speaking of which, I wanted to share because you and I haven't talked about this, but it's very relevant to our conversation. When I came to Boulder, Colorado 15 years ago this month, I came with several books that I had written about collapse and a lot of collapse awareness. And initially, I had presented a workshop here before I actually moved here. And so when I moved here, there were people who came to me and said, you shared with us that book called Sacred Demise,
Mhm.
and we'd like to continue a study group around that. And so I said, sure, let's meet, a couple times a month and study that book and maybe study others after that. So, long story short is we formed and I facilitated a group around collapse for 6 years.
Mhm.
And during that time, um, I looked around Boulder and I felt very lonely
Hmm.
because, and I never talked about collapse except in that group. Because, I came to a community that's very affluent. And, if you drove a Prius and you put your children in Waldorf schools and you donated to certain politicians and you recycled your garbage and blah, 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 that was fine. And, we're not really worried about climate change here because, well, this is Boulder and nothing bad's going to happen to us.
Hmm.
Blah 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 and on and on. And I'm being hyperbolic here to some extent.
Hmm.
But I never talked about collapse because I thought people would think I was crazy in this community.
Yeah.
Well, last winter, I think it was in December, I got this email from a friend. And he put the email out to about 25 people. We're starting a collapse awareness and acceptance group. We'd love to have you join us. And I'm going, oh my God, where did these people come from? Because most of them, except for the friend who invited me, I didn't know. I didn't
Mhm.
know they were here.
Mhm.
What rock have they been hiding under? So we got together and we started this group, which we haven't really given ourselves a name for yet.
Mhm.
Um, we call it the end of the world group right now, but we're not
Mhm.
really serious about that. We're
Right,
we're
right.
looking for a better name. And we meet twice a month on Sunday for a couple of hours. And this has just become my new community.
Hmm.
And it
Nice.
is so supportive. We love each other so much.
Yeah.
And right now, we're just trying to define who we are. We're looking at, do we want to just keep doing that? Do we also want to be involved in the community in some way? What is really our role and our function? What do we want to do? So we're just being present with that. And I suspect that at the beginning of next year, we will get clearer on what we're actually doing together. But it is so wonderful. And I wanted this kind of group for years,
Hmm.
and never really found. And I'm not the leader. Thank God I'm not the leader. No, there is no leader.
Hmm.
We're just all together as one family, and it
Hmm.
feels wonderful. And I just encourage people to make that happen wherever they can.
Right
I
on.
know it's
Beautiful.
rough. I know it's hard. And thank God for your Safe Circle group
Mhm.
and this program that you're doing right now, because that's the way this kind of thing starts.
Yeah.
Uh, but you know, start it and let's do it and make it grow because this is what we all desperately need.
Yeah. Boy, I couldn't agree more. And um, just to say it in a nutshell from with a little bit different words, that I know of no other level of engagement than intimate or personal relationships and or one layer out. That is a Dunbar number, the roughly 150 to 200 people max,
Mhm.
but far more likely it's a little neighborhood or a family group,
Right,
and it's down
right.
to maybe six, a dozen,
Mhm.
somewhere in that span.
Yeah.
I suggest that people can find each other, can find their people, find people with whom they resonate, whether it's a task-oriented group or some sort of contribution to the community group, or how we can be a co-op to buy food together, whatever the purpose is, that seems to be about the level
Yeah.
that's going to be consistently as much as possible face to face,
Yes.
and it's going to be able to fight off I don't know if we're going to get to this topic in our time together, but fight off the soul crushing engagement of AI and other ways in which there are imitations of intimacy, imitations of rapport, uh, some places where we can pour our attention and it'll suck it out endlessly.
Right.
And so what I'm seeing and perhaps we could explore this track a little bit. To me, there is an essential calling at the center of my work and even more importantly, my own practices is this is a time to be clear. What are the elements of soul? What are the elements of deep and sacred relatedness in these times? Because AI is already at a level that it's consistently outperforming doctors and nurses and across huge swaths of the human interaction fields. It already has so much more of an ability to create rapport, to
Yes.
and
Yes.
to really get us, like to engage us, like I want to be with this entity, that kind of thing. So just want to bring up that track. If it's of interest, we can pursue it. If not, it's fine. I just love that you're involved with your group. I'm finding myself really hungry for a face-to-face group locally as well. I feel just inspired by what you've shared to get something going. Um, I'm not done with virtual meetings. I don't know how we're going to live without it until it finally collapses itself. But I miss the sweetness. I
Yes.
miss that just irreplaceable sweetness
Yeah.
of being with each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So, you know, AI is kind of the next step after the social media
Mhm.
frenzy that we've been in for, more than a decade. I was very impacted by the Netflix documentary Social Dilemma,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
which really lays out how all of this came about and this longing for connection and how social media has um, attempted to fulfill it, but completely miserably failed.
Yeah.
And AI is like the next step. And this well, the Surgeon General wrote that wonderful piece on
Yes.
loneliness.
Yes.
And I think this is at the heart of so much toxicity in our culture. Um, the radical right and the white Christian nationalists and the Trump humpers, as I call them. Um, there's so much longing to belong,
Yeah.
and this culture is starving for it. So it really is not a surprise at all that what we see what we're seeing in terms of the extremes and people gravitating to extremity in order to belong.
Yeah. 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 It seems like there's a whole different track that we could go down in that direction. I call it that we've forfeited our center, both individually and collectively. We've
Yes.
forfeited our center or that sense of home
Yeah.
that we might feel if if I've got that orientation in my system, if I can refer to it, like if we've known each other a long time, and if you were to ask me, Dean, now how are you really doing? This is where I would go to answer that question. You know what I'm saying? And I often uh, indicate this part of my body from about the top of my neck down to my
Yes.
perineum, and
Yes.
I
Yeah.
call it my implicit system, my this is where I register. It's another term that I borrowed from Ian McGilchrist. I'm not a religious person. I don't have a particular faith that I orient to. And so, where a person, and I've had wonderful conversations with people from different faiths because I start to do this and I start to tell them what I'm
Yeah,
orienting to and what I'm referencing in my system and how expansive it is. I'm going
yeah,
further and further in and it's going further and further out.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
they can really relate. Um,
yeah.
so in forfeiting our center, both individually and collectively, we lose our connection both inwardly towards soul and then outwardly that expansion, that oneness.
Mhm.
So it's this extraordinary corrosive choice we're making collectively on this self-terminating track. So I think you've just um, spoken about that really clearly. And before we got the recording going, you mentioned that you don't have any more irons in the fire about books currently,
Right.
but you're shifting what
Hmm.
you're
Yeah,
engaging with.
yeah. I
And
am.
I'm wondering if this might have something to do with whatever your way of describing that soul
Mhm.
dimension, that deep and
Yeah.
possibly sacred relatedness and so on, in
Yes.
which is in our presence, in our bodies.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if that might be an opportunity for you to tell us where you're headed.
Okay. Happy to do that. Yeah, we have so many invitations. We're bombarded, in fact, with invitations to not know what soul is. Soul, what are you talking about? You talking about soul food, you know? Um, Soul, that sounds religious. I don't think I'm interested in that. We have all these invitations not to pay attention to soul and certainly not to be in our bodies and be familiar with this area that you're pointing to in your torso. Um, so what I'm doing more of is coaching.
Mhm.
And I've called it life coaching. I've called it collapse coaching. There are many, many names that I could put on it, but it's basically assisting people in creating this relationship with themselves, with each other, and with Earth.
Mhm.
And a lot of people have contacted me over the years who are collapse aware for assistance around this and to go deeper around this because they want to do this inner work that I'm talking about, and they don't want to do it alone. It's
Yeah.
so much richer if you have a companion on the journey.
Mm.
And so I'm drawn to do much more of that, and more people seem to be wanting to do that these days. And so that's what I'm up to. I don't know if I'll be writing any more books on collapse, because as I told you, I don't feel like I have anything else to say about it. Um, I feel like I've said it all. Um, and so I'm kind of going off in this different direction with coaching and actually doing a postgraduate degree in coaching, transformational coaching,
Mhm.
uh, and doing, really offering my presence
Mhm.
to people who want to do this work.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not at all surprised. And I know that you've actually been offering, this the seedling early version of coaching for years.
Right.
But I can absolutely get why you might be motivated in this time to be going there.
Yes. Yes.
Um, I don't want to drill down too far on the kind of the contrast between this zone of soul and of presence and of an embodied relatedness with one another. And these are kind of the rich loam of soul. This is that zone. But I just to speak about the other end of the spectrum, it's really just in the past year that um, I got to say, I'm rattled a bit by what I'm seeing and what appears to be very much brewing on the horizon, if not already closer than that, in terms of far more addictive and compelling and linear and mental and digitized ways of being influenced that we are creating for ourselves
Mhm.
and especially for our children.
Yes.
There's some brilliant uh, exploration going on. A guy that I think is really at the forefront of this is a guy named Zach Stein, who's been a part of
Yes.
the what could be
Yes.
called the sense-making community for
Uh,
for quite a while. He's not a
yeah.
new name at all, but I just I so appreciate what he's talking about with the really the sincere possibility of there not being a human being as a teacher, as an elementary school, middle school, high school, even in
Right.
college. We might not have
Yeah.
human beings as teachers much longer
Yes.
for
Yes.
the mainstream, for the average folks, because it costs a whole lot less to have an, an AI teacher
Mhm.
that doesn't need to be fed, doesn't need to collect a
Yeah.
check, doesn't need
Right.
to,
Right.
uh,
Support a family.
yeah,
Yeah, we already have AI psychotherapists. So,
yes,
yeah,
yes, yeah. So two things. I'd like to be sure that you've said what you'd like to say about this coaching work. Like, I don't know if there's something you might want to share about. Actually, there are just two questions that I seem to have brewing for you,
sure.
just because I want to know, just
Mhm.
because
Sure.
I want to know
Great.
what you think.
Great.
I'm curious if you could share with us. You've been on this path explicitly and implicitly for a long time.
Mhm.
You've seen a number of dimensions and iterations
Mhm.
of how these cultures, from real close in to
Mhm.
globally, you've seen these things and the evolution of it. So I'm curious two things about that experience that you've had. What now matters most to you?
Mhm.
And if you could speak to how that might be any different or not
Mhm.
from, say, 10 or 20 or 30 years ago.
Mhm.
And similarly, on the other side, perhaps of that coin, what are you concerned about?
Mhm.
What actually moves you like, I'm concerned about this?
Mhm.
And is that any different
Mhm.
10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago?
Mhm.
So I don't want to take you off track of anything you
No,
might
it's fine.
to further say. Yeah? Okay.
We're
Great. So
good.
if either of those questions ring
Yeah,
your bell, please.
sure. Yeah. Um, well, everything has gotten more urgent in the last 15 years. I kind of mark the beginning of my collapse awareness and doing something about it, in terms of 15 years at this point.
Hmm.
Uh, and so initially, when I first got into the topic of collapse, it was, I was involved with transition towns and how do we prepare? The word prepare was really a big word. How do we prepare, as if it wasn't already happening? And so now we're in it, and everybody has a different idea of what in it looks like. But we're certainly in the throes of what so far has been long-term collapse and not falling off a cliff.
Mhm.
And and so as I witness these things that I didn't know about 15 years ago, which was AI. I mean, I knew something about it, but not very much. I had no idea the extent to which it would usurp so much of our time and energy and identity. Um, as I've witnessed, the chaos and the division and the separation from ourselves, each other, and the earth,
Mhm.
it's like I don't want to help people prepare because we're already in it,
Mhm.
but I want to assist people as much as they are willing to do the work that collapse is demanding. It's demanding of us.
Mhm.
Um, Now, we all can choose not to do that work. Why would you want to choose to when you can go off and do AI and stream movies and take vacations and make
Mhm.
lots of money? Why would you want to do this work?
Mhm.
For those who do, I want to be present with them. I want to help them reconnect and reclaim their bodies, their emotions, their relationships, and do what I can one on one.
Mhm.
And I work with some people who've been collapsitarians or collapse aware for a really long time. Some people who still haven't accepted it and still, have some judgments about people who are not collapse aware
Mhm.
and helping them understand um, that they are not superior because they have this knowledge, and helping people go deeper and deeper and deeper into their wounding and
Mhm.
into their losses and their grief so that they will feel that compassion with all living beings,
Mhm.
whether those living beings are collapse aware or not.
Yeah.
So that's much more of the work that I'm doing right now and
Mhm.
want to go deeper with and want to continue with. Uh,
Beautiful.
because
Yeah.
people are longing for a companion and a guide as they really come to terms with this stuff. And
Mhm.
so much grief work. And it might start out with, well, I lost a loved one. And then it becomes this larger and larger and larger and larger well of grief that people feel compelled to explore. And then we come together and find not only the grief and allow that grief, but we also invariably experience the joy that is
Mhm.
on the other side of it.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I have great joy in the work that I'm doing right now, as do clients who are doing it.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm
It's
sure you experience that as well.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. In my own practice, and then
Mhm.
with the folks who stay with us in the community of practice is what we call our more in-depth practice group. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So got another couple questions.
Sure, go for it.
Um, one is a bit ridiculously obvious, but I, want to ask it anyway.
Sure.
And that is, are we an insane global culture? Are we expressing insanity? And it's really a leading question into the more significant one, which is how might you offer some guidance, some suggestions, some sharing of your own experience, whatever you might want to offer to someone who's trying to find an orientation to something more sane? How do I, sure, I see it's insane. It's crazy everywhere. How do I, in my life, my situation, my circumstances, my relationships, how do I find a way to live a sane life?
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to tell you a little story just happened last night. And that's a bit, I'm moving into answering your question, but this story
Great.
is a way to do that. So I was talking with a friend last night, a dear friend, on the phone about the debate. And she said, I'm so mad at him. I'm so enraged. I watched most of it, but I couldn't finish it. And she just went on venting and venting and venting. And she said, he's a sociopath, and so is my husband. And that's what triggers me. I just can't stand a sociopath. And she said, and what I can't stand even more is why people follow him. And even though he stands there and people tell him, your pets are not being eaten, he continues to insist they are. Why? I don't get it. And I said, well, you're a very bright and educated woman, and you're trying to figure this out through logic. That there is no logic to why people follow this, cascade of lies.
Yeah.
It's not about logic. It's not logical. It's psychological. And what is it in any dictator that hooks people's wounding? And I said, I wonder how many women in his base have been sexually abused by their fathers or slapped around by husbands and are continuing this pattern because something in them is hooked. Their wound has been hooked by this madness. And that's the basis of the insanity that I see. Deeper parts of ourselves, whether those are places of wounding or places of, happy memories that we enjoy, are hooked by the insanity of the culture. This craving for relationship that is getting hooked by AI. And all the other, you can think about any of the other symptoms of madness that we're seeing everywhere. And it's important to ask ourselves, what hooks that in me? What could draw me to that? Maybe it doesn't draw me to that, but what's the potential there? What is it in my history, my brokenness, that gets sucked in?
Yeah.
And therein lies the healing. Therein lies the joy, ultimately, when we can do that work.
Yeah.
But, to try to make the culture sane, good luck with that.
Yeah.
There are
No,
pockets of where we can do that, but not on a large scale.
yeah. Well, I'm with you completely, and I hope you didn't hear that in my question. I don't see us having, most human beings on the planet right now experience extraordinarily little, if any, agency whatsoever.
Right.
But the further out from their body, out from their intimate relationships, out from their neighborhood and so on, it's less and less and less.
Yeah.
So I'm with you there. Absolutely. And so if I go back to this person who's asking for some guidance, some suggestions, what are some ways that I can reclaim some of this center, reclaim some of this home inside myself, a place where I can actually be in deeper
Frozen.
related. Did I freeze up?
Yeah, you did.
Okay. So I'll just say it again if that's
Sure.
not
Yeah.
too much.
Go ahead.
So if I'm the guy that I was talking about before, who
Mhm.
is looking for, yeah, it's a crazy world. How do I find sanity for myself and for my
Mhm.
family and
Yeah.
so on? It's nuts. And so how can this person who cares a lot, but really is new to this whole conversation, how do I connect with what really matters to me?
Yeah.
I wanna be able to trust my own truth. I wanna know what the truth is. Right now, I don't know what the truth is anywhere.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I also want to have really meaningful relationships with the people I love.
Mhm.
It feels like that's getting further and further away.
Mhm. So what
How?
I might do, what I might start out with is just getting that person more and more away from the outer and closer to the inner. And
Mm,
so as you're telling me all this, I might ask you, what does that feel like in your body?
hmm
Well, I don't know. So close your eyes and just sit quietly and breathe
hmm
and think about this sense of feeling like everybody's crazy or the crazy culture and what do you feel in your body? And then I just ask them to tell me that
Yeah.
you know and and then we might talk about anything old and familiar about that
Mm,
and they might bring up childhood stuff or something that has happened recently that triggers them
yeah.
and then I might ask them if they ever have time when they're just sitting quietly by themselves, even for 5 or 10 minutes. Do you ever allow that to happen? Do you
Mm,
ever journal? Do you ever go out into nature? And I don't mean just taking a walk around the block, but do you ever go to like a park where there aren't a lot of people or to the woods and you go in there and you're just kind of with nature for a while? And so, these kinds of things to help people get further and further away from out there and more in here because they spend precious little time in here.
yes.
And then, it's just like having those experiences and then maybe writing about them. And they don't have to be writers or
Mm,
drawing about them,
yeah.
you know. And then next session, what was that like for you to
Yeah.
do all that stuff? You know, and we kind of go from there. It doesn't have to be a big project, just
Yeah.
the simplest things.
Yeah. It's funny. I was talking with a mutual friend of yours and mine, Holly Trular,
Uh-huh.
who is part of a team that's taken over, at least temporarily, much of the work of another mutual friend, Francis Weller.
Uh-huh.
And, they're just doing an amazing job. I love every
Yeah.
one of those folks on that team and
Right.
Francis, of course, as well. And I remember one thing that Holly mentioned is almost word for word what you just said. Like, what's the simplest practice that we can engage with
Yeah.
that brings us just a little bit closer to soul,
Yep.
just a little bit closer to embodiment, to our breath, to our feeling body. I'm throwing in words that I
Yeah.
would use.
And our humanity.
Yes, yes, and our interrelatedness. Yeah. So, Carolyn, congratulations. It's just been so inspiring over these years to track with you as you've plucked each of the strings in the books that you've written, the particular elements that you've brought to light for us, whether it's sort of the human shadow or it's our relatedness in the face of great stressors. These are vitally important topics, and you've just been so far ahead of your time and so far in depth with each of those topics. And now for you to be choosing this slightly different, but really,
Deeper.
yeah, it's
But
deeper and it's more present and it is more embodied. This coaching work that you're describing for us, just congratulations, and it just so is written on your face that this is a good choice you're making. This
Thank you.
this
Thank you.
appears to be working quite well.
Yeah, it does.
And one thing I wonder if you would, before we sign off with each other, I'm wondering if you would offer whatever you would like in terms of an invocation or a wish or uh, yeah, invocation seems to be the best word I can think of right now for us all, for anyone that you would like to invoke in your own experience that you would like to speak to or presence them in this space. Can you offer us some words to propel us into these coming times? Whatever that means for you.
Yeah. Well, I often go back to Mary Oliver,
Mm.
um, and the bothness, the both andness of what we're dealing with, where she says, "We shake with grief, we shake with joy. What a time these two have, housed as they are in the same body."
Mhm.
Um, and that's the path.
Mhm.
That's the path for us right now.
Yeah. Carolyn, so great to spend time with you. And
Thank you. Likewise.
I'm
Likewise.
so happy for you carving out this new path for yourself. And it just reeks, no, not reeks. It is it so smacks of aliveness for you, and it's so easy to resonate with you on this particular parallel track.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's exciting, it's inspiring, and thank you so much for all that you've brought for all these years. It's been extraordinary.
Thank you so much for having me and for having this deep, wonderful, juicy conversation.